Greetings. Welcome to Midweek Sneak Peek. I'm Rich Brown, chairman of Next Generation of Business Leaders. I'm here with Chris Muldrow of Ramble Type and now Fredericksburg.Today. And let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
So let's talk about what brought you to Fredericksburg. You didn't grow up here.
No. I grew up in South Carolina, in upstate South Carolina, and spent most of my life there. I went to the University of South Carolina, and I met a girl. We liked each other, and she went to graduate school at the University of Virginia, and I was in the newspaper business, and I figured there were newspapers in Virginia, and there was only one UVA graduate school, so I knew who was going to be moving, and that was me. And so this would have been 1997. I started looking around for a job in Virginia, somewhere close to Charlottesville, and I found a job at the Freelance Star. And so I moved up here. We got engaged, and I moved up here. Put a ring on her finger, and then moved up here. And I was here from 97 until 2005, and then left town for 5 years and came back in 2010. It was a girl. But we're still married.
I feel like a lot of our stories, a lot of our interviews start that way. Adrian Silversmith was the same. He was like, well, she was coming here, so I came with her.
Right. And it turned out to be a really great move. We were doing the commuting thing for a long time. I lived out at a farm in Spotsylvania County when I first moved here on a cattle farm. I had to drive to the gate, open the gate, drive out the gate, drive through the field, open the next gate, drive through the gate, close the gate, and if the bull decided that he was going to be in the field that day and was going to rub up against the gate, then I just had to wait in my car till he was done. I did that for a while. Then we got married, and I lived in Orange because she was in graduate school, and then we ended up moving to Warrenton and lived in Warrenton, and she was working up near Dulles Airport, and so then I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, for 5 years, and when we came back, it was my first chance to actually live in the city, and we knew we wanted to come back here for a lot of reasons. We knew it was a good place to raise kids, good schools, good community, so I kind of liked the city already, but the fact that we sort of picked this place to come back to, it was important. We were looking for a place to make a home, and then we'd figured out what we were going to do work-wise once we got here. To some extent. I had a job, but we still wanted the flexibility that this area is able to offer you that you don't get in Birmingham, Alabama, or Montgomery, Alabama.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at the same time, you were in media, right? You were in newspaper. Every place has a newspaper.
Well, every place did have a newspaper. When I got out of school and I worked at the state newspaper, which is a big newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina, and that was my first job out of school, and moved up here to work at the Freelance Star. And then when I moved to Birmingham, I was actually working for a newspaper company that owned papers in 26 states. And so at that point, I got to see all the little towns where that's the only media they had was the local newspaper. And, no TV station, often no radio station. These are the places where you fly into the airport and then you drive for an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to the town where you were going to go meet
I grew up
people.
in places like that.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of those places now. I think I visited something like 75 or 80 of our locations when I was working for that company.
That's
and
awesome.
So, Gun Barrel City, Texas, and places like that. Port Arthur, Texas, the home of the smallest airport I've ever flown into. I had many frequent flyer miles for a while there.
Nice. You've been in some form of media
Since
middle
school. Yeah.
like 8th grade, right?
Yeah, I think it was 8th grade, maybe even 7th grade.
So you're writing for the school paper? This is a side job, or what are you doing?
No, so in middle school, I was the editor of the middle school newspaper, and did that. And then when I got to high school, I was on the high school newspaper staff. And the newspaper where I lived in Greenville, it had this high school page. And so the deal was they would get a student from each high school in the city, and they would hire them onto the high school page. And you'd go in once a week, and you pick a story at the newspaper, and you'd go interview people. You'd write the story up. They'd run it in the paper. They'd write you a check. My brother hated it because he worked at a drugstore. And so I would go and write one story a week and make as much as he was making like all week long in the drugstore. So he was not real happy about that.
That's a good life lesson, though.
Well, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
It worked out well for me.
I mean, that's the argument nowadays, right? Like, I'm working at a cashier position. I want $15 an hour versus be creative types and creating content. And that
right,
kind of thing.
right. And it was a good job. It was an interesting job. That newspaper isn't around anymore. It was
Just
at
because
the
like
time.
Chris Muldrow, right?
Well, that's probably what it was. Yeah. No, there. A lot of cities had morning and afternoon newspapers for a long time, and that was one of the last afternoon newspapers. And actually, it shut down a few years after I got into college. Company bought it and rolled it into the morning newspaper, and you see that in a lot of places now. I don't know that we have many afternoon papers left, and certainly 2 newspapers in a town is very weird. But at the time, that was sort of the golden age. That was the height of the newspaper business.
Nice.
When I was working there. So yeah.
So how old are you working for this newspaper?
When I was in high school?
Yeah.
Oh, I would have been 16, 17.
And so we're looking at like some hazing stuff. Like
No, it was actually really cool. The editors sat down with you and worked through every story you wrote and told you what you did right and what you did wrong. And that was my first lesson in everybody needs an editor. And everybody, I still feel that way. Like everybody needs somebody to check after what you've done and make sure you didn't do something stupid. And so, yeah, I really appreciated that. I mean, it's funny. One of the women I worked for at that paper, I ran into 10 years later. And at that point, I was sort of a newspaper executive, I guess. And I ran into her in Milwaukee. When that cool museum opened that has the wing, I don't know if you know about the museum in Milwaukee. It's got these cool wings that open up. But I'm walking through there and I run into this lady. I recognized her, and she recognized me. And she's like, "Chris, how are you doing? I've been following your career." And she had worked with me all this time.
That's
and
awesome.
It's just sort of kept an eye. The newspaper business, like a lot of them, everybody knows everybody else at some point. But yeah, I ran into her years later, and she still remembered me and everything.
That's awesome.
So that was cool. Yeah.
It sounds like what every internship is supposed to be.
Yeah. And I had a second internship when I was in college down in Naples, Florida. And it was the same deal. I got down there. It was actually kind of a funny story. So I was in South Carolina, University of South Carolina, and I was doing an internship in Naples, which is about as far south as you can go before you hit ocean on the west side of Florida. And so I drove down there, had a kayak on top of the car, drive down there, and it was supposed to be an internship. So I was going to learn all this stuff. So I get in there, and I was going to be a copy editor. And basically what a copy editor does is edits everybody's writing. And this was an English language newspaper. And the young woman there was another woman who was on the copy desk who was French. And her English was only, let's say, passable. She got in a knockdown, drag out argument with our editor within the first week I was there, and she quit. And so basically he came in the next day and said, "Look, Chris, I know you're supposed to be an intern, but you got to cover all her shifts, So I ended up, working pretty hardcore that summer, working at the paper. But it was a great job. It was because you're at Naples, you could and you're a morning newspaper, which means your shift is 4 to 1. So you sleep late and you go to the beach and you swim and you grab some lunch and you ride your bike in and you go to work around 4. Couldn't ask for a better internship. So yeah, I did fairly well on the internship score.
That's awesome. So I don't know whether to call it foresight or ambition, but you did something that most people around that time, if they didn't do it, they're really kicking themselves in the butt for it. And that's that you started doing the online multimedia stuff as it kind of came along and tried to keep up with it and adapt and at least see where it was going.
Yeah, I had gotten interested in computers. My dad designed pulp and paper plants where they make paper. And so he was a mechanical engineer, and he bought a computer and brought it home. And I was doing his computer-aided design work for him. He'd pay me to do computer-aided design. So I got interested in playing with the computer. And when I was in high school, I got my own computer got my own money from the internship and bought a computer and sort of taught myself more. Well, when I started in college and was getting ready to graduate is right when the first browsers were coming out. And we realized, or a few of us realized, that this was going to change things. The idea of having information that anybody around the world could access through a computer, it just made a lot of sense. And at the time, a lot of people weren't getting into it because they didn't think that the computers would be ubiquitous. Nobody had the idea that you'd get it on your phone. The idea of a mobile phone. I mean, what the hell, So we started playing around. I started teaching myself how to do HTML, and so I would work my whole shift on the print side of the business, and then I would go over to another desk and start working on a computer, and we would put all the news up on the website. This was 95, 96. And that sort of started my career. So I really spent most of my time in newspapers doing that work. And we were sort of making it up as we went along. We had to build a lot of tools and stuff because they just didn't exist. You couldn't take courses in it. Nobody was teaching this stuff. There were a few books out there, so you'd go and buy a book and read it and figure out how HTML worked, and then go try it out and see if you could make it work. And we just kept sort of pushing the bar on what we thought we could do with the computers. So it started an interesting ride that has taken up my whole life, really.
Right on.
Yeah.
So coming out of college, you're getting into the news industry and learning that, and also trying to learn HTML and teach yourself the internet, so to speak. 20 years later, students are kind of having to do the same thing, right? Because where you had to learn HTML and Java or whatever was going on at the time, now it's pick a platform. Is it Snapchat? Is it Instagram? Is it Twitter? What is it? And is that the right choice? Is it going to be around next year?
Yeah, I think I've learned something new. I would say every 2 or 3 years, I found myself having to totally learn a new technology. I've had to find myself totally learn how to do something that used to work great in a different way. And a lot of that's because technology is moving so fast now that our ability to interact with one another is really, really increased. So if you think about it, like when I got out of school in 95, there was no Google. There was no Yahoo. We were just starting to get this idea of websites. And then, Yahoo came about. It was huge to be able to find information with a search engine. Google came out. We had to react to Google. The social networks, which we had sort of played around with. We had this thing called Fred Talk that was an online discussion forum where people could talk back and forth. And that, we started that in the early 2000s. Facebook is really the evolution of that sort of environment. And even now we see that some of the Facebook usage has dropped off. Younger people don't tend to use Facebook as much. And then just the devices that we've used have changed a whole lot. When I first got out of school, I had a pager. Mobile phone was not something that I could afford. And now the computing power in my phone is vastly superior to what I had in my first computer. I mean, orders of magnitude greater. It's got a phone or a camera on it, so I can take pictures with it, and not just pictures, but video. It knows where I am, so it's got the geography built into it, knows where I am. It could store a tremendous amount of information. It can connect to networks very easily. I mean, this is this is science fiction stuff that has grown up, since the time I started doing this. And every time a new piece of technology comes out, you got to learn something new. So the iPhone came out, we had to learn something new. The iPad came out, we had to learn something new. Geo tracking, having a GPS on everybody has really changed significantly. For me in the news business, one of the biggest pieces was that phone, or that camera in the phone, because it meant that more and more people could sort of capture what was going on in the news in a way that we'd never have before. I don't know if you saw the other day, someone hit a bear on 610 up in Stafford, and killed it. Driving along, hit a bear. You hear about people hitting deer, but this was weird. Well, there were pictures of the bear up on Facebook before any media company got to it. There were people just driving by, and they took pictures with the camera on their phone. That creates a whole new world that you kind of have to figure out how you're going to work in that world. And yeah, the people coming out of school now, they have to learn everything we learned and everything new that's coming. And I think the thing that I've really learned is you don't learn the technology, you learn the flexibility, right? You got to learn how to sort of roll with changes, and you also have to understand like what stays the same. So for me, what stays the same are things like writing a good story, talking to people and communicating with them and understanding what they have to say, figuring out what a good image is. How do I frame a good image? Those skills haven't changed. In fact, I do some work with an old journalism professor of mine. We teach a class down at USC every summer to high school students. And it's funny because we're talking about the same stuff that I talked about in his class. How do I check up on a source? How do I ask the right questions? How do I make sure my grammar is correct? How do I edit a story so it's readable? That skill's never gone away. Yeah.
I would argue that the bar is being raised because I can teach myself composition on YouTube. I can teach myself anything on YouTube. And so we're almost all kind of competing and having to have some level of standard that's maybe greater than it was in the past.
Well, you definitely more people are publishers now than ever were, right? That we're in fact, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day. Legislation's not keeping track with technology. The schools aren't keeping track with technology in many cases.
They're refusing to. They're locking it out. They're saying no cell phones in the classroom, no laptops in the classroom, no tablets in the classroom, because they're afraid you're going to check their work or check what they're saying.
Right.
And it's going to be a distraction from the class. And I think they're killing themselves.
Yeah. I'm sometimes amazed to talk to a kid who's high school age where their technology skills are not at the level of mine. Because I feel like they grew up with this stuff, know. Certainly my kids, they know how to use a tablet, they know how to use a computer. They've got no interest in programming, doing that sort of thing. There are a lot of other things they're interested in, but yeah, just for me, it's that question of I never stop learning, and if I get myself in a rut where I feel like I'm not learning something, that's when I'm looking for something else. Because I feel like when I stop learning, I'm probably doing something wrong. I probably gone the wrong direction if I'm not learning something new. And I've got a young woman working for me now who's a student at Mary Washington, and it's awesome having her in the classroom because she questions stuff. She asks like, "Why do you do it this way?" Or she's awesome because she tells me, "No, don't do it that way. You got to do it this way." And I feel like I'm learning from her too.
It's awesome. You don't see that much with full-time teachers. I think you see it typically with the men and women who work in industry and come in to teach occasionally. And
I don't know. I don't know. I think my kids have been blessed with some excellent teachers who really do ask the questions. My son comes home from school and talks about what they talked about in his civics class. Like, he's really, really into that. And it's because his teacher is engaging him. And my daughter is, her teacher engages her all the time. And so I think that there is definitely, there's some great teachers out there. I think what I see sometimes is, you talk about people from industry, they do bring a different perspective in. And there are certain areas where that perspective, you'd never be able to get it if you've been a teacher your whole career, because you hadn't worked in that space. And so, that's why I like the idea of internships. That's why I like the idea of, also the idea of getting to know a lot of people, because you're always going to learn from somebody else. I feel like interacting with people, like one of my business, my digital marketing business, a lot of what I do is like work with companies to sort of, figure out what it is they need to do to build their business. Well, I learn all kinds of cool stuff about different businesses from mine. And that's why I like doing that, because I figure out, well, how does this retail business function? Like what drives the revenue? What drives the bottom line for them? Where are their expense concerns? Where do they feel like they can grow and not grow? And again, if I learn that from this person, the next job I go on, I can apply some of those lessons in that job. And it might not be exactly the same, but I can ask the right questions then. So it's always like ask questions of people and try to figure out what it is they do. And how do they make money? How do they pay their employees? How do they pay the bills? Understanding that, because it's different for every business. The more you understand that for different businesses, the more it sort of rounds out your own understanding of your own business, I think.
Not to be selfish or incredibly biased, but I think the best internships happen with entrepreneurs because they've got that level of connection and down to earth and connectedness, and just being able to, hey, this is how I did it. This is the stuff I've struggled with, etc.
Yeah, well, the thing about working with an entrepreneur, whether you're an intern or even you're early in your career, is if they're doing it right, in my opinion, they're bootstrapping their business. They're trying to do it, and they're not trying to do a huge venture raise or something like that. When you're in that bootstrap environment, you by necessity are going to learn lots of pieces of the business.
Yep.
And that's really important. Back in the day when I was working in the print newspaper world, I used to love to go down to the press room, and the guys would show me how those presses worked. Now, I couldn't run one to save my life, but at least I understood like how that piece of the business functioned. And that way, when I got later on and I was like in a role where I'm looking at balance sheets and stuff, I understood what that line for plates and the line for ink and the line for paper, understood why all those were where they were, because I had gone and sort of tried to do a good job of being well-rounded in the business. And that's what an entrepreneur will do for you, is they've got to be well-rounded because they don't have the resources that a long-established company is going to have.
Yep, absolutely. So you followed your girlfriend here.
Yeah.
Got married pretty quickly. You left for a while. Where'd you go?
I went to Birmingham, Alabama. I went down there. My old boss moved down there to work for a big newspaper company, and I went to work with him. And we were in the corporate office at this newspaper company. We had 90 daily newspapers around the country. We were in 26 states. The guy I went to work for left pretty soon after he went down there, leaving me in Alabama. And so I became vice president of internet operations for this company, and ended up taking on the technology role there as well. And my whole job was to travel around the country and sort of teach newsrooms and ad departments and publishers how the internet worked and how it worked in terms of the newspaper business. And that was a pretty crazy time, because the newspaper business really peaked on the print side around 95, 96 from a revenue standpoint and just a business standpoint. But the internet business was growing. And so I was in a growth industry in the middle of a declining industry, which is not the best place to be. I
tenuous at best.
Yeah, I did not Zuckerberg my way through the internet years. It was a challenge, and a lot of the challenge was there because people didn't want to change, and I was sort of Chicken Little, and the sky really was falling, and people didn't want to hear it. But we did a lot of cool stuff. We did. There's some stuff that we did that I was sort of proud of. We were one of the first companies to use this ad platform that Google built. They were using it on YouTube, and they wanted to sort of make it available for more companies. We were one of the first companies to do it, to test it. So I worked with the guys at Google doing that. We were meeting with the Facebook guys pretty early in, not real early, but they had grown to a level where they were sort of working with newspapers. We were doing a lot of real estate stuff. I did a big deal with Monster.com for job listings. Here's a funny thing. Like, did a deal with Monster.com. They bought Hot Jobs. Now, most people don't go to Monster. They go to Indeed if they're looking for jobs online. And Indeed will only be around for a while, and then somebody else will take the spot. I mean, it's like a shell game online. Who's dominant at any given time? And that dominant player changes. And you sort of doing what I do, and actually people who have businesses who are doing their own marketing or whatever and trying to communicate online, they have to keep ahead of things. It's not just the web guys. They've got to figure out, like, am I going to spend money on Facebook, or am I going to spend money on, Instagram or Snapchat or wherever? They have to make that call, and they have to make that call every few years. And we were doing that while I was there at CNHI. We were teaching these guys how the internet worked, and then having to constantly go back to people who just gotten it and go, hold on, everything changed. There's a new thing you got to learn, because the old thing you learned, they just got bought by somebody, or they just went bankrupt, or new technology came out and they got obsolete, overnight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what brought you back to Fredericksburg?
Well, in 2010, a couple things were happening. As I said, the print newspaper industry was a little rocky, and the company I worked for was not doing what I wanted to be doing in that industry, and they were also getting ready to move to Montgomery, Alabama. And I didn't want to move to Montgomery for lots of reasons. And so I sort of did this East Coast tour. I got a flight up to Richmond, and I think I got a rental car, or maybe hopped on the train, and I did a tour up the East Coast, talking to people that I knew and sort of saying that I was thinking about looking for another job. So I sort of took a few vacation days and did this. The very first person that I met with wasn't really a meeting at all. It was my friend Nick Cadwallander, who was the publisher at the Freelance Star at the time. And we just went to grab lunch because we're friends and we wanted to go hang out. So we went and ate lunch, and I did this whole tour up to New York and Delaware and all these different places, and went back to Birmingham. And in a few weeks, Nick called and said, do you want to come back to Fredericksburg? And he was looking for somebody to handle internet operations for the Freelance Star. And he called me on a Friday morning and asked that question. And I went home at lunch, and I sat down at lunch with my wife and said, excuse me, do you want to move back to Virginia? And she said, yeah, okay. And so I called him. I went back to work, and I called him up and said, okay, sure. He said, okay, well, I'm gonna fly you in on Sunday. So we'll get you a ticket on Sunday. You can fly in. You can go look at houses with my wife, and then come into the office on Monday, and you can say hi to everybody, and then you can give your notice, and you can come back. And so that's what I did. I flew to Fredericksburg on a Sunday. I looked at houses, met with people, flew back I think on Tuesday, gave my 2 weeks notice, and moved back to Fredericksburg. And I think the reason I did it, like I said, we wanted a good place to raise a family. We had 2 kids at that point. We had a kid when we were in Alabama. We had 1 kid when we were living in Virginia before. We were looking for a place that would be a good place to raise kids. We were looking for a place that had proximity to a large city, but wasn't necessarily in a large city. We were looking for a place that had character, or an identity. And, having been all over the country, I've seen places that have that and places that don't. This community has it at a level that you don't see in many places. I mean, the history here is rich. It's deep. It covers a lot of American history. I was talking to the mayor the other day, and she said, if you want to look at America and the history of America, that one of the best places to do it is Fredericksburg. Our founding fathers, a lot of them grew up here. Business in the colonies. This is really one of the first places business happened. There are a lot of places where settlement happened, and there was like struggling, scraping to get by. But in Fredericksburg, businesses started being built. And then, of course, a tough history, but a significant one is, be in the front lines of the Civil War. That all happened here. And to be able to take my kids and walk them 100 yards out of my backyard and be at the trenches and see the trenches where those battles were fought, and be able to take your kids downtown and say, that's where George Washington's mom lived. That's powerful. That's really powerful. And if that's not enough for you, then you drive up to the Smithsonian and spend time up there. So it's a good place to be. We people joke about Fredericksburg that come here and been here's, but this community is one where a lot of people are sort of choosing it now to be home. And when you choose a place to be home and you really sort of set your roots in, it's a special place, I think. And yeah, so we plan to be here for a while. My wife jokes with me. She's like, "We can't move for 6 years," and we're past our 6 years, and there are no signs of us looking to move anywhere. I think that's a good sign.
Did you expect her to put up a fight when you said, "Let's move back to Fredericksburg"?
No. I'm from South Carolina. Alabama's sort of a bridge too far for us. It's not an environment that we never really settled in there. We never had that sense of community in Birmingham. I think part of the reason for that was I was traveling so much. I never had a chance to sort of set roots there. But it's a bigger place. This place felt better to us, and I think she liked Virginia better than she did, being down there. So there was not any fight, really. I think the only argument was like, I got to move these kids, and a short, side story. I moved down here, say November-ish, and she was still in Birmingham. And she got sicker than I've ever known her to get, some kind of flu thing. And she had to go to the hospital. And she had to drag our 2 kids with her. And one of our kids was little. And it scared me a lot, so that was not cool. I was looking for a house, I got to get them up here. Because it was really scary having the family down there and not up here. And she, I think, felt the same way. Just that transition of getting everybody up here. We were ready to get that move done. So no, there was more of a struggle when we moved to Birmingham than moving back here. That was a whole other conversation.
So let's talk about community, because it seems like it's a repetitive theme here.
Yeah.
How'd you come to be involved with this space, with Friends of the Rappahannock?
So Friends of the Rappahannock, when I was working at the newspaper, one of the people who worked there with me was on the board, Friends of the Rappahannock, and he retired. And I had always, I love the river. The river's an important part of our community. It flows through the middle of us. In fact, the old director of FOR used to say, or still does say, we have to remember, if you live here and you've ever had a drink of water out of the faucet, the Rappahannock's part of you. We all get our water from this watershed. And so keeping that clean is really important. I also kayak and fish. And so when this guy retired and there was an open board seat, I was really interested in going and seeing what I could do to help out. And so I did. And I've been on that board for, I think, 5 years now. And it does really positive things, not just to protect the river, but to teach kids about all the stuff around us. There are a bunch of kids in our schools who never get a chance to go outside. They've never been camping. They don't really appreciate that this resource is right down the road and something that is important to keep this community and, frankly, a huge swath of land all the way to the bay, keep that healthy. So FOR is important to me. I think they do amazing work here at keeping the river clean, and I think more importantly to me is teaching our kids to keep the river healthy, keep the woods healthy, keep their environment around us healthy. And frankly, they do it in a way, it's all science-based. It's not, I joke with people, FOR is not chain yourself to a tree kind of environmental organization. We always come to the table with a scientific backing, a lot of information, we try to figure out, we take our time before we take a stand on something to really understand what the impact's going to be. So, that, and again, I love the outdoors. So I felt like that was something that I could do for the community, is sort of help out there. And my kids love the outdoors now too. And a lot of that, when you see your kids like eager to volunteer for a whole day at an FOR event, and both of mine were last weekend, they both volunteered. I feel like I'm doing something right. I think I'm setting a good example to some degree. So yeah, that's important to me. I do that. I'm also on the board for Mental Health America at Fredericksburg, which is sort of like, this is my sort of earth, cause, for lack of a better term. But then Mental Health America is more about people. What I've learned, and I joined that board because a friend of mine asked me to. He was on the board, and he told me about them doing good work, and I went and met with the director, and I said, well, this is interesting what you guys are doing, and you need help, and you need somebody who knows what I know. I'll go help out. And what's happened over the years is I've learned a whole lot more about like how mental health affects people in our community. And I've learned that, we all know people who are struggling with a mental health issue. If you don't think you know someone, you just aren't digging deep enough. And there's a lot of stigma about those issues. And Mental Health America is really about trying to get that stigma dealt with, trying to get people the resources they need. And so that was a funny sort of organization that I joined because somebody asked me to, and now it's become, in my mind, an important part of like how I'm trying to give back to the community, is try to help that group. And we do good stuff, and other people really support us in that mission. I told somebody the other day, just last weekend, Jack Brown's Tattoo Revival, they do this Tattoos for Community every year.
Yep.
Well, Mental Health America was the beneficiary of that this year. They raised like nearly $26,000.
That's awesome.
And they gave all that to Mental Health America, and that was awesome. People have tattoos, and they pay for their tattoos, and that helped this great organization. So, that was awesome to see people in the community really sort of getting involved that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you recently took over Fredericksburg.Today.
Yes.
And I'm familiar with it. I've looked at it. I've spent a little bit of time on the site. Tell me how it works.
So there's a woman named Susan Larson who worked for a big company called Patch, and they were doing local news coverage, and they laid her off like 3 or 4 years ago, as they did to a bunch of editors all over the country. And Susan had a couple choices. She could go find another job for somebody, or she could start her own company. And she chose option B, and she decided she was going to build a locally owned news and information website where people could go and find out what was happening in the community. And she's been working on that site for about 3 years and has really built a pretty sizable audience. So the site's got about 30,000 unique users a month. We've got 11.8 thousand Facebook fans. We've got an email list that's not as big as I'd like it to be, but she's really grown an audience over the years. And I had been sort of her technical bounce ideas off of guy, and I'd been hosting the site for her because I like the idea of a locally owned independent news organization in the community. So I've been kind of helping her out. Well, last month, she scheduled a meeting with me in my office, and she came in my office, and I thought we were just going to talk about some random technical stuff that I hadn't gotten done yet. And she said, well, I'm moving to Vermont, and I'm moving at the end of the month, and I'm either going to shut the site down or somebody's going to take it over. And then she stared at me.
So you thought you were getting called into the principal's office. She's like, here's the keys to the school.
Yeah, to some extent. And for me, I still believed in what she was doing. So from a community standpoint, it was something I wanted to see continue. From a news guy standpoint, I knew the traffic on the site, and I knew that she had a bunch of audience, and I saw an opportunity, a business opportunity that fit my skill set. And it actually sort of like meshed in with what I was doing with Ramble Type, which was doing these marketing services for people. A lot of media companies now are trying to frame themselves as ad agencies. And I'm sort of going the opposite route. I already had an agency, and now what I'm doing is bringing a media publication sort of into the mix. And so for me, it was good. It made sense. And we did a deal. I mean, I'm buying it from her, but it's not a I'm not going broke doing it, and it's a growing product. It's pretty solid now. The numbers go up every day. I like seeing that. So like all the little bits checked out. Now there's some struggles. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what I want to cover and what I don't want to cover. I'm still trying to figure out what sort of resources I need, at 3 months, 6 months, a year. So trying to figure out what growth makes sense. I think, we were talking earlier and I said, I believe in bootstrapping a new business, and that's certainly the way I'm sort of planning to build this. So I have to make decisions about what can I do in month 1, month 2, month 3, and what do I really want to do, because I have to build a revenue stream to grow that. But the cool thing is having that kind of audience, that sort of makes sense. It's not a hard ask to go to somebody and say, hey, I've got 30,000 users. You want to go buy an ad? You want to be on my email newsletter, that sort of thing? It sort of makes sense. And it's been good. I'm getting really positive reaction from people about what we're doing so far. I do a lot of police and crime coverage. People are really interested in that. I'm trying to increase the amount of nonprofit coverage I'm doing. One of the challenges local nonprofits have is because we don't have a TV station, and a lot of our radio stations have really cut back on the amount of news they do, except for Ted Schubel, who does his own news thing and does an awesome job. We don't have a lot of media outlets in town, and in most markets our size, with our size population, they would have a TV station, or 2 or 3. They would have multiple radio stations that had news operations. They might even have more than one print publication. We have a smaller print publication, one radio station doing, a bit of news, well, doing a lot of news, but it's an AM station, and not much else. And so these nonprofits don't have anywhere to tell people about what they're doing. They don't have any way to get word out. And other organizations in town and businesses in town, they just don't have the kind of volume of media that a market our size normally would have. And so there's opportunity there for this thing to grow. And that's what I'm trying to do, is figure out, how can we do more for those groups? How can we communicate more? We did start a job board. So anybody who's got jobs locally that they need to hire somebody, they can list their jobs for free. I'm trying to get sort of a core of job listings locally so people can have one place to go to find those jobs. And we're going to be adding more stuff too. I'm looking at classified ads. Got a really great partner doing some real estate stuff right now. And I'm talking to some other people, beer coverage. We're working on I'm going to have a beer reporter, which I think every newspaper should have. Trying to figure out what else I can do to get coverage, whether that's interns or, hopefully full-time employees. Part of my philosophy about starting businesses is, ultimately, if I can support some people with a full-time job, doing good work that they like doing, I think I'm doing something right. And so one of my goals is, how do I get to a size where I can, support other employees full-time to do this thing?
Are you open to user-submitted content? Do you generate most of the content yourself now? How does that work?
I'm getting a lot of people sending me press releases about what they're doing. I'm trying to use those as much as I can. I'm open to people who want to write things. Actually, one of the things I want to do is start an opinion section. And so I'm going to start asking for people who have opinion pieces to write, who are willing to spend a little more time on it, rather than arguing on Facebook. Give me 12 or 20 paragraphs about what you think, and I want to try to share some of that information. So I'm way open to user submitted content. I think being able to offer that sort of platform with a wide audience and do some categorization and keeping track of that stuff and sharing it with other people, that's what's going to make this thing grow. So I'm absolutely open to that. And also photos. People love photos of events and other things, and I can't be everywhere. So, the more people take pictures and write information, I'm trying to share all that stuff. Yeah.
Aside from opinion pieces, are you maybe interested in certain specific types of work?
Well, one of the areas that I would really like to expand what I'm doing is people who are working in the government and military contracting business. That is an economic driver in our region, a huge economic driver in our region. We don't have anybody in town who really does strong coverage of that industry, to be blunt. There's a lot of information about people who win contracts, what they're looking for, when they're hiring, that sort of thing. A lot of that stuff does not get dealt with, and I would like to be doing a whole lot more with that. So I'm looking for people who are in that space who can talk about what they're doing. Now, I know a lot of those guys can't say a lot about what they do because they might be in classified space, but they're pieces of what they do that they can talk about. But I do feel like the people who are working in that space, particularly those who are doing technology work, they're the ones who are really, A, driving the economy, and B, who have technology that could be commercialized or expanded and grown into something larger. They've got the people working for them who have skill sets that make us attractive to outside businesses as a region. So I want to be doing a whole lot more with that. So that's one big area that I want to do more with. The nonprofit area is another one that I'd like to be doing more with. And frankly, people doing stuff like recreational sports and that sort of thing, the running races and the cycling events and that sort of thing. Bowling league. I'll run your bowling scores. I'll run your race results. If you want people to know about it, I'll run it. The other thing is education. Getting more information about. Frankly, about what our kids are doing in schools is really cool. I mean, kids do great stuff in our schools, and they're winning awards all the time, that sort of thing. I'm interested in doing more with that too. But really just talking about the community and trying to get more information about what people around here are doing, what's important to them, and what drives us as a region. That's sort of what we're about.
Right on. I want to circle back real quick before we close up. I usually talk about something that I struggle with a lot is work-life balance.
Yeah.
You've certainly found a way to combat that. You're quite involved in the Scouts, right?
Yeah.
What's your involvement there?
So I'm a Scoutmaster at Troop 170. We've got about, it's between 40 and 60 kids. I never really know what the number is. But my son is a Boy Scout. I was a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. And I actually tell my guys everything I know about life I learned as a Boy Scout, including how to play poker, the important life skills. But that gives me a chance to get out with my own son and do cool stuff. But it also gives me a chance to meet some really amazing kids. We just had a set of triplets and one other scout get their Eagle Scout. I've got a couple other guys I've got one guy who's actually going to do an event, do his Eagle Scout here this coming weekend. Those guys help keep me grounded. They help me always do this thing that I try to do, which is, am I doing the right work? Am I keeping the right attitude? Am I doing all that stuff that I learned when I was their age about being trustworthy and loyal and helpful? Am I still doing that stuff? And am I prepared? Be prepared is what they teach in Scouts from your very first days. And this whole conversation that we had about watching as things change and trying to adapt, that's all about being prepared for changes. So that keeps me grounded. Frankly, the stuff that I do in the community and the stuff that I do with my business, but particularly the stuff I do in the community, my kids and my wife are involved in those things as well, and they have things they do in the community. I'd rather be doing that than sit and play in a video game or, piddling around on my computer. And I know that's what I would be doing. If I was home and I didn't have these other things, I'd be staring at a screen or monkeying around with my phone. And so the more that gets me out, whether it's working with a group or paddling on the river or camping on the weekend, the more of that I do, the more I feel like I'm doing good stuff, you know, and trying to be a better person in the community. And so that's why I do that stuff. So I don't really, you know, you talk about work-life balance. It's sort of like the life piece, like what does that look like to you? And to me, a lot of this nonprofit work that I do, that's part of what life is. It feels like work sometimes, but ultimately, you know, like I said, when you see your kids like eager to go because they volunteered to talk about carnivorous plants for 4 hours at a festival, that reminds me that, you know, that I'm making a difference somewhere.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Well, I wish you the best of luck. I
Thank
appreciate your time.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate your time for watching this video. Chris and I have agreed and committed to spending 2 hours after we post this video to respond to any questions you have, reply to comments, and just be a part of the conversation. So leave your comments in the space below, and we'll look forward to chatting with you.